You are about to enter a great adventure.
This is Starting from Gorilla.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Strutting from Gorilla, first of 2021. And as you heard, that is the great entrance music of Bret the Hitman Hart. Today, we've got a deep dive into the career of Bret the Hitman Hart, our favorite wrestler here at Strutting from Gorilla, where we're four guys in our mid-30s who love to chit-chat about wrestling, mostly 80s and 90s, but we can be in the 10s and 20s. So this is the first part of a three-part series that we're doing here at Strutting from Gorilla. We're starting out with Bret the Hitman Hart, The Excellence of Execution. We'll be moving to an episode of The Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, his mortal enemy. And then we'll finish it up with the third and final edition where we will compare the two careers. We will give you our thoughts on who's better, who's the best there is, who's the best there was, and who the best there ever will be was. So today we got our Bret the Hitman Hart show here at Strutting from Gorilla. We've broken it down starting all the way back in the Stampede years, the Hart Foundation in the 80s. Then we're going to move on to the Hitman years, the 90s, where most of the diehard wrestling fans will remember him from. And then, we'll move on to the WCW years, which are, as you'd probably guess, kind of sucky. And then we'll even bring back, his return, his redemption tour back in the 00s and 2000s. So here we go. We're going to start back in the Stampede Wrestling era, the Hart Foundation, the 80s, the early 90s. Vito, start us off.
Thank you, Mango. Yeah, I'm really excited for this episode. Love Bret the Hitman Hart. We talk about him all the time, so we'll get right into it. Obviously he's an icon in the business, and it starts from the beginning, right? Where he kind of came up through the Stampede wrestling promotion, which was run by his father, Stu Hart, who has the dungeon, right? Everyone talks about the Hart dungeon, where Stu would go down there and beat the living shit out of you, and you'd come out a better man, right? You'd come out battle tested. Well, funny about Bret, and what I think this is where it all started, is he has an amateur wrestling background. So like he started wrestling as a young kid in amateur wrestling. He actually went to college to wrestle and actually major in film production, which I think is pretty good parallel, because Bret tells some great stories in a lot of his matches, and I think that has to do with it. He as he went along, he became known as one of the best jobbers in wrestling. So as he came along through college, he went to the Stampede Wrestling promotion that Stu Hart ran, and people knew him as the best jobber in the world, which basically means he learned very early on to take a beating and earn his way up the card, right? Big difference from today's wrestlers. I think you could see the difference where they're not in a factory just coming out and then all of a sudden winning a title right away. He started as a ring announcer. Then he went up as someone who was a jobber. And then he would literally get his ass kicked by everyone.
So Vito, he did some refereeing too.
Yeah.
So to tell the listeners, one of the like the big like timelines that we're getting here and we're kind of giving to you can be seen on the 2005 DVD that WWE released about Bret Hart. So some of the things that we're kind of putting out there for people who may not have seen it or just aren't really that familiar with Bret's career, that's kind of where we're getting some of this from. So it's all from Bret's mouth. One of the, you talked about his ability to job, Vito, and he talks about learning that from these two guys that worked for Stampede Wrestling at the time, Mr. Hito and Mr. Sakurada. And he says he credits them with being able to have that hard-hitting, realistic, technical style. And he attributes a lot of his successes later on to kind of the foundation that he got while training with them.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, definitely. And I feel like a lot of wrestlers kind of learn a lot through Japanese wrestlers. There's a good heritage there, and I think it's that kind of that honor and respect factor. And I don't think a lot of wrestlers today get that, but I think that's a big part of Bret's career and what made him so great in this industry. One of the things that I think is notable from the Stampede days is that he had matches against the Dynamite Kid, which Dynamite Kid he's talked about a lot from a lot of wrestlers, and Bret has great respect for him, and he has some great matches. Mike, have you seen some of those matches? I know you had talked about them before.
I had attempted to find some on the network, and there was really only one that I could find, and it was actually on an episode of NXT UK. The wrestlers were sort of giving some of their favorite matches. So Rich Holland put out a match. I think it was from right when WWF had bought Stampede Wrestling. So it was on an episode of Primetime Wrestling, and it was Dynamite Kid versus Bret Hart from, I think, like 1985. You could tell right there the things that those guys were doing but we see it almost every week now on like Raw or NXT and AEW. The things that those guys were doing at the time were, I don't think it's hyperbole to say they were borderline revolutionary in what they were doing. They were quick
agreed.
styles. I mean, Dynamite Kid had one of the best snap suplexes ever. I mean, you only really saw Chris Benoit do something like that. But their ability to work such a fast-paced match and also be so hard-hitting and technical, what a hybrid. And I think it was really something that was the beginning of a shift in how people saw smaller wrestlers.
You know, Chris Jericho talks about Dynamite Kid a lot too, and how he was a big influence in his career. So I could see it, and I think that's where you get a lot of it from. The thing I notable about Dynamite Kid is I believe he had a lot of brain issues, and Benoit is the one who started doing the flying headbutt, which I believe Dynamite Kid did, and that they basically said, like, don't do it. Look what happened to Dynamite Kid, and Benoit continued to do it. But that's a side subject. But anyway, so moving along here, you know, the WWF then, you know, in their destiny to be this big conglomerate that they are now, they started to buy up promotions, and they bought Stampede Wrestling. So they had all of these Canadian wrestlers on there, and a lot of them trained by Stu Hart. And you could see the difference in those wrestlers when they come in. Right now Bret has got a bigger place to go out. The first thing that he does, he joins with Jimmy Hart and Jim the Anvil Hart, and they become the first Hart Foundation. Interesting point here. Bret never loved to do promos. He hated them. In fact, the reason he wore those sunglasses was because it was to conceal his nervousness during the promos at the beginning. And if you listen, Bret really is never the best on the mic. He ends up he kind of ends up turning into this guy that can be good on the mic. I'll get a little bit into that later on. But I always thought that was very interesting. And then it's kind of like the Earn story, right? Like everything that happens organically, just it feels so much better. Like the glasses became what made Bret Hart so popular. He'd come out, put them on a little kid's head, and it was awesome. Like I was telling you earlier, Mike, I have a pair of the Bret Hart glasses somewhere in my house, those souvenir ones, and they're iconic. It's what makes him who he is.
It's so great because as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about something he said about when he first got into the WWF and how the foundation was formed. He was recognizing he was sort of jobbing out. You know, they weren't really utilizing him, shocker. And he did something that a lot of guys weren't doing at the time, which was he was going to management and saying, this isn't working. We got to do something different. You know, we talk about all the issues with WWE creative now, but it was happening back then too. So this is nothing new. And then they ended up putting him with, like you said, Jimmy Hart and Jim the Anvil. And it was so good because what it did was, one, he wears the visors. And like you said, it helps him kind of during the promos hide his nervousness. But also he could rely on Anvil and he could rely on Jimmy Hart to be the mouthpieces. And he didn't have to do too much. And it worked so well, like you said, very organically. And during that time, you know, Jesse Ventura was on commentary during a lot of that time frame that the foundation was kind of hitting it big. And one thing that he kind of alludes to on the DVD is he says that the term the dungeon was never something that was really popular. And it didn't kind of get brought into like mainstream until Jesse Ventura started like mentioning it. So he's kind of the one that we can credit with the dungeon taking on sort of the aura that it takes on, the mystique. So that was a really cool little nugget. It's like it's not even on the main documentary. It's on like one of the extras on it.
Good point.
Before we move on a little bit, the dungeon is real.
Yes, it is.
Was it like a dungeon?
It's just a basement. It's an unfinished basement with a lot of like gym mats there.
Yeah.
And basically Stu Hart would take guys down and train them. And when I say train them, he would kind of like, I'm only speaking from the one clip that I saw from the Wrestling with Shadows documentary where he's down there and you hear this guy just screaming and this guy like passes out and he's just stretching them. And it's like nuts because Stu Hart at that time, I feel like he's like in his mid 70s or something or close to 80. And this kid is definitely in his mid 20s and he's just stretching them and this kid's crying. It's friggin' hysterical.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, so JR actually talked about this dungeon, and he had a snippet on his podcast that, you know, when Shawn Michaels was facing Bret Hart at WrestleMania 12 for the Iron Man match, they did these vignettes on how they were training. And so JR actually went down to went up to Calgary and went down to the dungeon and was doing some filming. And Stu Hart brought him down there and said, "Hey kid, you want me to show you what's down in the dungeon?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure. I'll go down there." So JR goes down there and he starts putting moves on JR, and immediately JR taps out like right away. And he came back up and he tells the story on his podcast, and it's pretty interesting. But I figured I'd add that little snippet about the dungeon.
To be a fly on the wall
That's
watching
awesome.
Stu Hart stretch JR.
Hilarious.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Stu Hart was the owner of Stampede. They were kind of in some financial straits, right? They weren't doing that well financially. Vince threw him the lifeline. They take over Stampede. Was Bret like the main acquisition there from Stampede?
Well, I think it was Bret, obviously Dynamite Kid as well, that were sort of the main two guys. This is all according to from the DVD that I saw, like this documentary. Like, well, I just watched it again this week, and Vince kind of sings the praises of Dynamite Kid, and Bret Hart is like, I guess there were other guys there too that he thought he saw some potential in, but I think according to him, those were the two main acquisitions from getting Stampede.
And also it was a Canadian presence too, right? Now you're getting the Canadian fans involved as well. So it's kind of, that's when WWE was in the process of trying to buy up every territory, and it was big controversy. But yeah, that was part of it, definitely.
You know, Vince gets a lot of shit for that, but this is a story for another day. But like, it takes two to make an acquisition. You know, they had to be selling if he was going to be buying.
Yeah,
that's true.
Correct.
But yeah, so we're getting into the WWF years, and he was part of was Anvil his actual, like, was he really related to Anvil?
So Anvil married his sister, who,
I see.
Yeah.
Brother-in-law.
Right. So I don't know. I don't know like the full timeline of it. I don't know if like him and Bret's sister ended up getting married like as a result of them forming the tag team, or it happened before. But I mean, either way, it sounded like Bret was pretty comfortable with him, and obviously you saw that in their ring chemistry. They kind of had a really versatile style. You know, kind of getting back to their Hart Foundation years. They were one of the first tag teams where it wasn't just like two big guys or two small guys. It was, you know, you had a powerhouse and you had a guy that could work. So that was really important. And I think that was something that we've seen that formula repeated over the years. So there's been an influence from their work together. And they were versatile as a tag team. They worked with guys like Demolition, the Rockers, Killer Bees, the British Bulldogs.
Nasty Boys.
The Nasty Boys. I mean, they could work with
Beckers.
Well, yeah, they could work with all of them. You know, there was one match that I watched recently, and forgive me, I just got to pull it up because I think it's one of their matches against Demolition that it was like a 2 out of 3 falls match, if I'm not mistaken. And it was like one of the better tag team matches I've ever seen from Demolition. I don't know how that happened. Like, I think I was sleeping on Demolition.
We know how that happened, Mike. It has Bret Hart in it. Like, come on,
Yeah.
let's be
Okay.
honest.
SummerSlam 1990. Sorry, I have like 5 different documents up on my computer right now, so I was a little confused. But yeah, SummerSlam 1990, Hart Foundation vs. Demolition, 2 out of 3 falls. Oh my God, it was so good. You get a little like save from the LOD too, because Demolition was doing some shady tactics, but really fun match. And that crowd pop is wild.
I haven't honestly
that
seen
you'll
that
see,
one. I need to check that one out.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
I haven't seen it either. A theme that you'll see as we go on, fans, is that people have their best matches with Bret the Hitman Hart, whether it be Demolition.
It's
like
true.
You just said, you slept on Demolition.
I did,
but I don't think you did. I think they sucked, and Bret Hart brought the best out of them. I would say that. So SummerSlam 90, he's part of the Hart Foundation in the tag team championship match, right? And then we go on to 91. That was a big one. That's what she said.
Yeah,
sorry, that was a terrible transition.
It was an awful transition.
Yeah, no, that's all right. But before, as we move towards that too, the one thing about the Hart Foundation, right, that was great is that Jimmy Hart. Not only did they have last names that were the same, but Jimmy Hart was a great mouthpiece for Bret and the Anvil because neither one of them could really talk great at that point. So having him as a mouthpiece was really good. He went in and actually had one of his first singles matches in Boston against the Steamboat, right? Ricky Steamboat. And it's one of his favorite matches of his career. And I haven't actually seen it, but I can imagine it's awesome. Steamboat always puts on a great match. Bret Hart, you put those two together. Oh man, that's like a pro wrestling erection right there. Like it just love it.
Beautiful. It's beautiful stuff.
They won two tag team championships in their career. The Hart Foundation did. And then they lost it at WrestleMania 7 to who else but the Nasty Boys, who again, probably a leader of men's favorite tag team because they're two very large individuals. Okay.
Believe it or not, I enjoyed the Nasty Boys, but they were not one of my favorites.
Well, that's disappointing because they were one of mine.
Harlem Heat was actually one of my favorite tag teams.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, so they lost it at WrestleMania 7 to the Nasty Boys, and then they kind of split up at that year. So now we move into like the Hitman years, right? I think you're starting to see the potential of Bret Hart. They're seeing how good of a wrestler he is. Here's the thing though about this time. Okay. And it's still like WWE is really good at promoting. So their matches at this time were never really about the wrestling. They're about the promotions, like the immortal Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, larger than life. The matches are not what make it. It's the promotion and the thought of the matches. And now you're getting guys like Bret Hart who can actually wrestle come in. And in 1991, he had an Intercontinental push where he beat Mr. Perfect at that SummerSlam for the Intercontinental title. And I don't know if Mike, you kind of want to go into this a little bit. I mean, I watched the Davy Boy at Wembley Stadium, the British Bulldog match.
Yeah,
he talks about it was voted match of the year. It was voted one of the best in SummerSlam history. Hart said it was his favorite match. I got to be honest, I was not a huge fan of it. So I don't know if you want to talk about this.
Are you talking about the SummerSlam match? You're not a big fan of that one?
Yeah.
I think it's really great for what it was at the time. I think it's one of the first times at that moment in WWF where the title wasn't the main event. So you had this mid-card title with Bret and British Bulldog main eventing in London, which was really cool. But I mean, I guess I can see where people would get that, because a lot of times when we talk about like some of our favorite matches are the ones that kind of get really promoted out there as like the best of, this is the pinnacle of it. We kind of start to like almost rebel against that. So I can see why you might feel that way. But when talking back again about Mr. Perfect, Bret really credits Mr. Perfect as a huge influence on him as he began to get a singles career push. That Mr. Perfect was constantly going to bat for him. Obviously, I think it was well documented that Mr. Perfect had a history of like back issues and was constantly sort of fighting through the pain to make sure he could be there for certain like keystone matches in Bret's career. Obviously, that Intercontinental Championship win in '91, and then a couple years later, he does the same thing for him again with at King of the Ring. He wants to make sure that he's there to sort of help put him over. But yeah, that match with Davey, I think, was a turning point in the sense that you kind of saw that Bret, in the position he was, in the stature of wrestler he was, could carry a company. I think that's what Vince McMahon might have taken away from that. I have no idea, but that would be my guess, because you saw that. You got 80,000 people in a stadium jam-packed, and they're hot for Bret. I mean, and British Bulldog too, for that matter. So it was really starting to change the idea that it needed to be a big guy as your heavyweight champion. So I think that's the significance of what that match meant, more so than maybe the match itself.
This is such a huge period in the career of Bret the Hitman Hart, and it was at a time when WWE was under a lot of scrutiny with the steroid scandal and Hogan and all this stuff, and they were looking for a guy who wasn't so obviously roided out, like you said, who could actually work a match. And this was just such an exciting period here where Ric Flair kind of comes into the fold. Did you guys mention Ric Flair?
Not yet.
Okay. All right.
No.
Yeah, it's a huge transition period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, eventually, Flair drops the title to Bret on this like Coliseum video exclusive, which was also kind of, that to me was like almost like a bigger slap in the face still at the time. Like they didn't make it like a main event of like a major pay-per-view. They just did it sort of on a whim. They just kind of dropped it. And that had to do more with like Flair's contract situation and all that. So you could sort of overlook that, but it's still a big moment for Bret. And I just watched that match again recently, and it's good. It's a great match. And I think it's only one of maybe twice or three times they might have even had a match together. So it was really cool to watch Bret get to that pinnacle. But this is there. So I kind of have a little bit of a hot take here as I'm going through this. So when I'm watching the Bret Hart documentary, and he talks about the title win, and he kind of touches on his title wins in general, and generally feeling like a majority of them were really just him being a transitional champion. He was sort of there, and that his runs were never taken super seriously. And he presents evidence that like many of his title defenses were never the main event. And I started thinking to myself, when was the last time there was a champion like that? And I thought of CM Punk. And it feels very similar in terms of guys that were not really much like the rest of the other guys that were getting put over at the time, guys that were not afraid to sort of stand up to the management and sort of talk about what they felt was an issue for them, and guys who generally sometimes get vilified for doing that. So that for that reason, that's why I kind of made that comparison. And I don't want to like take away from the rest of this podcast to doing that, but it just kind of just something I noticed, and I just wanted to throw that out there. That's my hot take.
Yeah, I think a lot of that too, like I had mentioned, goes back to WWF at the time promoting. How do you promote a guy like Bret Hart? He's not the biggest guy. He can wrestle, which is what you want to see, but that's not what puts fans in the seats. Was he the biggest draw? And I don't think at that point he was. He put on some excellent matches, and for people who are fans of wrestling, yes, as you look back, you see that. But is he the guy that could draw the most people in a seat? And I don't know that they thought he was. And that's the problem. And it was the same with CM Punk, because you got this small guy who's champion. And now, is he the guy that's going to draw people? And I think that's where they missed the mark. They went back to their old ways. Vince McMahon said, these guys are not his marketing ways. These guys are not going to draw fans, so they shouldn't be champion. And I think that hurt their overall run as champions, because they were fighting an uphill battle from the start. And now they're fighting with their company to be that guy. And I think that's where it all comes down. And I think we all have a lot of respect for Bret, because we watch the matches and we're all like, damn, this guy puts on a hell of a show. But is he going to draw people? Is he going to make money? And that's ultimately what WWF wants to do. So that's where I see it as.
Right. And I think you're right in that sense, Vito. And to sort of jump on that, what's odd is that by us talking about his matches the way we were, that's marketing. Yeah. You tune in because you're going to see a great Bret Hart match. You're going to see a champion To even quote the Cena thing, like, and he never gives up. He's resilient, and he's hard hitting, and he's never going to die on you. Like there's something to be said about that, and I think, like you said, they missed the mark. So
it's the same reason Ric Flair would never have been as big in the WWF if he started his career there, because he was loved everywhere down south, but he was not a big guy, but he knew how to wrestle. He knew how to tell a story, and like it just that is what makes the difference, and that's where WWF misses the mark all the time, and you can see the parallel here nowadays. You're pushing guys like Roman Reigns, who finally is getting it together, or Brock Lesnar, who they draw people, but like at the end of the day, it's stagnant, and Bret, it was just that enigma that I felt was so good in the ring, and we all agree there. I gotta say, Bret Hart you talk about people who could punch, right? Like you look at some of the people today and they can't punch. Like Bret Hart had some believable punches, and that's like a big thing. That's a big thing. But to move along, like I know, like we talked about him being the Intercontinental Champion. He won his first title from Ric Flair on video, right? Then he went along, and in 1992, he had his first a main event with Shawn Michaels at the 1992 Survivor Series. What do you think? Like, what do you guys think of that? Like, I don't know. I really don't even remember the match.
I don't really either. It doesn't really stand out to me, and maybe it was just sort of where they were at the time. But I'll be honest. I've been watching a ton of his matches, and that's one of them that I haven't gotten to yet. I have a huge queue of matches to watch, so I haven't been able to touch on that one yet, which is bad considering this is a Bret Hart show, and I haven't watched it.
He ended up having a successful title defense against him. And I think that's right when Shawn started to kind of get into his solo run too.
Mango, you're going to say something?
Oh yeah, guys, I remember this match very clearly. It was one of my favorite matches growing up. The Shawn Michaels, like you said, he was just starting his run as a singles guy, and they kind of went on together. So Survivor Series 92 versus HBK, it's almost like you had to give Bret Hart a guy he could work with, but also he was going to win that match. It was going to be unambiguous. He was going to win. And then the same thing happened at Royal Rumble 93, if you might remember, against Razor Ramon. Do you guys remember this?
I do remember that match.
And so there were two consecutive pay-per-views, Survivor Series and Royal Rumble, where he won clean. And they were trying to rip the Band-Aid off of getting away from Hulk Hogan.
Yep.
And then they tried to get away from Hogan as best they could. And then that leads up to this WrestleMania 9 thing where they threw the Band-Aid back on and tried to push all the blood back into the body and said, you know what? We tried it. Bret Hart was going to be the guy. But who comes in? At the very last second, our fuckface Hulk Hogan.
You know who also got screwed out of that? Yokozuna.
Oh yeah.
like we talk about Bret too, and Bret did get screwed because if you watch the match he has with Yokozuna, it's really good. For Bret working with such a large guy, it just speaks to his versatility in general. But he gets screwed out of just having a classic match where maybe you just have a title change and some rematches down the road.
So, as you are all well aware, Yokozuna is one of my favorite wrestlers. He was, by this point, almost 550 pounds. He was one of the quickest big guys ever to hit the main stage. And Mike, to your point, it actually was a solid match. Where we keep calling it a disaster is because of the Hulk Hogan thing, right? Well, Hulk Hogan's getting ready to move on to other pastures as he moves on to WCW shortly after that King of the Ring match, right? But in order to get to that next pay-per-view, because this was the inaugural King of the Ring, they needed to create a little bit of drama, controversy. That was one of the few matches that I did go back and watch because I'm like, why was it a disaster? The match never was a disaster. The match was fucking good.
It's the ending.
It's the ending. And, you can blame Mr. Fuji for creating this ridiculous challenge, or you can blame the Hulkster who needed to go out on top as a champion one more time at a WrestleMania before he moves on to onto his next stage.
I blame that.
Yes,
I don't blame Mr.
I
Fuji.
also blame
we
that.
all do.
Yeah.
But to put a sharpshooter on a 550-pound man, I mean,
Yeah, that's
gentlemen, that's
impressive.
insanity.
Impressive.
That
It's
was cool.
impressive on
Yeah.
all
I do remember that.
fronts. So, I don't have much to say on this whole episode, but you want to talk about my guy Yokozuna? I'm gonna give you a little bit of insight. And
No, thank you, Bobby.
So you're right, Bobby. That brings up a good point. Bret always found a way again to bring out the best in his in the person he was wrestling, and it was awesome. It's like this respect factor, right? He always had respect for the person he was working with. He'll even tell you to this day he never injured a single wrestler, and that's something he's very proud of. But the crazy part about that whole thing is, he always told a good story in his matches. Like you could always find something, and I'll get into this when we talk about him and Stone Cold. But that's even a perfect one. You have a guy who's 500 something pounds. He can move around the ring, but to put on a good match with him is very difficult to do. And unfortunately, was scarred by Hogan. But as we move along, you'd think that at that point, that's a step back for Bret, but it wasn't, right? It wasn't. He moves into winning. He was a 2-time King of the Ring winner. And he goes into this feud with Jerry Lawler, who I know you guys are not a huge fan of commentary wise, but the feud he had with the King was pretty entertaining. It was actually a feud of the year in '92. So that's a big thing. And it basically started with Bret coming out being a 2-time King of the Ring winner, and Lawler says, "I'm the real king." And then they go back and forth, and they had a ton of different matches, and thought that was a pretty good one. And then we start to find something interesting, right? We get into the Owen feud, which could be one of the best feuds of all time. And I'll let someone else kind of elaborate on this one.
I'll jump in on here because I think besides the coming up feud that we're going to have a whole episode on, I think this was his best feud against his brother. I think things just clicked. And it was, we talk about organic a lot. We use that word, but it felt that way. And when things work out that way, we tend to be able to get emotionally invested. And this was one of those feuds. Just the whole thing. I mean, you have Owens, like the seeds of jealousy and dissent amongst him and his brother, and like Jim the Anvil started stoking the flames early on in some of the matches, and then you have kind of Owen turning on Bret, and what's interesting there is that Bret never comes out and says, I hate you, I hate your guts, I want to kick your ass. Bret was always very somber about it. He was always almost sad that he had to be fighting his brother. And I always thought that was an interesting take on his character while he approached these matches with Owen. He would kind of get pissed, but he was never saying, I hated my brother. And I just feel like that kind of emotional thread was something that me personally, I could latch onto and like, oh, wow, like he's sort of fighting his brother begrudgingly. And their work in the ring was just stellar. That match at WrestleMania 10 is unbelievable. Probably one of the best show openers for a WrestleMania ever. Their ability to just have chemistry with each other, which, to be honest, not a lot of family members have when they get in the ring together. We've seen some of those as time has gone on with like the Hardys and the Guerreros, and sometimes it doesn't always work. So it was really cool to see that Owen and Bret had that kind of ability to do that. And then once Bret, later on in that show, wins the title back from Yokozuna in his great sort of redemption moment from the previous year's debacle, he just continues on and has an absolutely stellar cage match with him. SummerSlam 1994. Mango, I think you might have something you want to say on this. Bobby does.
Actually, I wanted to go back to a little bit of the beginnings of the Owen and Bret feud. So this is an exclusive Bret Hart on his website, Confessions of the Hitman series. It's $35 Canadian for those who are interested in listening to it. It's a It's currently like 35 to 40 episodes, short snippets of little side stories that Bret wants to get off his chest. And one of them was actually the whole Bret Owen feud. Now, Bret and Owen needed to they discussed it because when Vince brought it to their attention, to Bret's attention specifically, because at the time one of his biggest concerns on the storytelling was trying to handle creative as well, and Bret was at least given creative, was able to give Vince creative guidance, which was seldom for many wrestlers. But Bret had that control because he was that good of a storyteller in the ring, but outside of the ring, he was able to pick up some steam there. And before Owen was Owen, he was the Blue Blazer, and he was a jobber. He was, he was actually getting ready to become a firefighter because he wasn't getting used enough. And one of the reasons to actually stoke the flame and show the wrestling community that he was one of the best in the ring, and he truthfully was. He was a great lightweight wrestler that didn't get enough credit. And he started getting the credit because of these matches. And Bret Hart talked to Owen, said, do you want to do it? Owen was all for it because he wanted to show the world that he was that good. And he knew, because at the time there was also a salary cap. He was a higher paid wrestler. So he was in it to get a couple of dollars too, because he was going to get a little more of a purse because he was fighting Bret at the time. It was like, of course I want to do this. And that's how they went home. They would go, if they were at home for Thanksgiving or something like that, they never talked to each other. They embodied the feud in every way, shape, and form. They stopped traveling together. And it's one of the reasons why we talk about that organicness. It was because they followed through in every element. They wanted to show you that it was real, to the point where it was so real that every time that they were traveling in Calgary to go off to another show, TSA, or Canada's version of TSA, stopped them, held them for luggage, and saying that there was something wrong with one of their pieces of luggage, and they needed to go through the X-ray machine multiple times. And Owen and Bret started getting really anxious because they wanted to get their flight. So Owen, being a little more vocal, goes, "This is bullshit." And Bret actually chimes in and goes, "Yeah, this is bullshit." And they're like, "Ha, you two do talk to each other." And that was the whole thing, because they wanted to show the world that they actually truthfully hated each other, because that's what they wanted to convey on stage. And they were so good with getting that done that that's why we loved the storylines that, whether it was Owen at Survivor Series in '94, when that was the whole, that was a great match, and it was a great way to segue into that WrestleMania 10. So
Yeah, that brings up a good point, Bobby, too. Like at that point, the Owen and Bret steel cage match got a 5-star rating, and I think at this point you're seeing Bret gain a lot of steam in the wrestling world. He won the 1994 Feud of the Year. Bret had won a few Wrestlers of the Year from Pro Wrestling Insider, PWI, or Pro Wrestling Illustrated. So he's gaining steam. He won his third title against Diesel around that time, and then he'd have one of his worst matches in his career against him when he wins that third title. He hated the match against Diesel, thought it was terrible. Goes on, and they start getting into the feud with Shawn Michaels. Okay, and this is where we're gonna pick up at the HBK versus Shawn Michaels. However, this goes big into Bret's career, okay? Because at this time, WrestleMania 12, HBK's at a point where he's got the sizzle, right? You got Bret Hart, who's got the talent, and he's a great wrestler, but can't talk on the mic. He's your ultimate professional, your consummate professional. But then you got Shawn Michaels, who's got a little bit more sizzle, a little bit more edge. And you're at this teetering point where, okay, what do we do here? What do we do here? And Bret was all about respect. He felt he had gained respect at this point. He was the head of the company. He held the title. Back then, holding the title was meaningful. It meant you were the head of the company, right? It meant something. And so at WrestleMania 12, they went back and forth, and they came up with a plan. Bret was gonna lose this match, and it was gonna be like a best of 3 series. Well, on the flip side, Shawn Michaels is kind of in a bad place here. He's the guy that, likes to party, does drugs, not really truthful, but Vince McMahon really respects him. Vince sees him as himself, as like a son. He sees Shawn Michaels as this guy above everybody else. And so they come to a conclusion, and this is where it all kind of starts, right? The feud between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. But Bret ends up losing this match. And at the end of the match, it's supposed to be this big thing. Bret's all about respect, right? When you lose your title, okay, and you're supposed to go, and the person who wins it, you get in the back of the room and they thank you, right? They thank you as a sign of respect. Well, when Shawn wins this match, he tells Bret Hart to get out of his ring when he does the thing where he gets on his knees and he's like this. He literally says, "Get out of my ring." And that did not leave Bret in a good state of mind. He was pissed. And that's kind of where this all starts, because these two are so different. Like, Bret's so professional, and Shawn is just like, I don't give a shit. I'm the wild child. I'm going to run this show. I'm cocky. I'm arrogant. I'm young.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the new guy. And I'm going to have and then it like builds up, and we'll talk more about it when we get to that special. But this is a key moment in their feud, a key moment.
I believe this is the genesis of their feud.
Yep. Yeah. And it's at this point, though, that Bret's like, okay, it's time for me to step back a little bit. I'm letting Shawn take the lead. He knew it. He was all about it. He was a little disgruntled. They show him they don't talk. He gets in the whatever Cadillac black car and speeds off, and he's supposedly going to retire. Right. And he's gone for a few months. This is where WCW comes to him, and they basically try to get him to come to WCW. And he goes to Vince and says, I have a lot of respect for you. I don't want to. And Vince, doesn't have a lot of money at this point. This is the low part of WWF's situation. And they give him a 20-year contract, basically making him a wrestler for his life. Okay. And at that point, he gets inducted into the Hall of Fame, the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, while he's still active in 96.
Right. Not the WWF Hall of Fame, to be clear, right?
Correct.
It's not that one. It's
the Pro Wrestling
an actual one. Right.
Yeah. So that brings up this next thing where, okay, he's done with Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels is going to hold the belt and be the new head of the company. Whether he liked it or not, it wasn't up to him. So he comes back and he says, these are the guys I want to work with. And Stone Cold is hot, right? He does that whole Austin 316 gimmick at King of the Ring, and he's gaining steam, right? He's gaining steam, and he sees him and he likes to work with them. And so that's when Stone Cold, he's got this attitude and he's trying to bring Bret out of retirement, and it turns into this great feud. And this is what made Stone Cold Steve Austin. It really did. I want to get into depth on this, but I don't want to keep talking because I could keep going on this forever.
It's great. Folks, if you can't tell, Vito loves Stone Cold Steve Austin. And so anytime he's going to get a chance to talk about Stone Cold, he's going to jump on it. No, Vito, I'm with you. I think this almost is like, obviously we're approaching the twilight of Bret's WWF career, and this is a hell of a way to begin that. Because those matches with Austin, both at Survivor Series and later on WrestleMania 13, which is the one everybody talks about, they're so great and kind of redefines Bret as well. And along the way, speaking to how unselfish of a performer he was, it's making Austin as well.
Oh, absolutely. And the Survivor Series match is so good because there were points where, Austin is literally begging Bret to come back and have this match. And he starts to slowly come back. And his first match back is against Austin at Survivor Series. So it's strange because you're getting this new attitude, this like Stone Cold is this like, malicious guy who will do anything to get Bret Hart back. And he absolutely hates him. Like there was one point where, Bret Hart hurts his knee and he gets in an ambulance and they put him in there and Austin's at the front of the ambulance driving it and he gets out and just starts beating the shit out of him. It was awesome. It was so good. It was so good. So they get to this match and you're like, everybody wants to kind of like Bret Hart, but then there are some people who like Austin and it's this weird dynamic. So the match ends with a roll-up pin of Stone Cold. Like Stone Cold was trying so hard to beat this guy who's one of the best wrestlers of all time, and it's a roll-up pin that wins it. So they go through things, and they build up this feud as they go along. And it was right around this point where Bret Hart gives the line, and I posted it on our Twitter. He has some match, I forget what it is, it's a steel cage match, and he loses. I think it's interfered with against there's some sort of interference, and if he had won that, he would have been defending the title against Austin at WrestleMania, I believe, and he ends up losing it because of interference. And Bret Hart gets pissed, which you never saw. Bret was the consummate professional, right? Like you said, low key, and he Vince McMahon comes out to interview him. And Bret Hart loses his mind. He says, "This is bullshit. Everyone in there knows I'm the best there is, the best there was." And you start to see this different side of Bret where he's turning into like this heel, and slowly Austin is turning into the baby face. And this is where I think the whole Attitude Era started, because now Bret knew that this was happening and he still wanted to come across as this nice, like do things the right way company guy. And Austin was the guy who was like, fuck society. I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it. They have their match at WrestleMania 13, right? And it was the match of the year. It was a submission match, which made it even better. They go out in the crowd. It was an awesome match. Bret was going after Austin's knee that was messed up. Austin was selling it. It was just fantastic. And then the best thing that happened was the finisher of this, because it wasn't Austin saying, "I quit." It was Austin passing out from blood loss in the sharpshooter, which was the perfect ending because it showed Bret Hart was still the superior guy, but Austin had guts, and it made you like Austin and hate Bret Hart.
Absolutely. It's one of the very few examples of like the double turn in pro wrestling. It's really hard to do. And it had to be, I feel like it could only have been those two guys that could pull that off. And let's not forget, probably the most jacked referee of all time in Ken Shamrock, just hanging out.
Yeah.
Keeping the peace in that match.
That's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. No, and so that really, I think that's what propelled Austin's career. Bret had a lot of respect for him, and that's a perfect example of someone losing and still getting over.
Absolutely.
And people don't get that any day. People think if I don't win, I can't get over, and it's not true. It's not true. So I know we're short on time, but this kind of leads us into the new Bret Hart, right? And the Attitude Era. And Bret Hart says that he hated the Attitude Era. But quite honestly, he was a perfect fit because he was that goody two-shoes guy that people, in your conscious, you're supposed to like Bret Hart, but you couldn't like him because you like Stone Cold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's a bad guy. So it's like you had this real life, thing going on.
You had a real life conundrum, Vito. It's that you liked both of them, but you didn't feel like you were able to have space for both of them. So you had to just choose one or the other. And at the time, Stone Cold was coming on pretty hot. So it was much more acceptable to just say, well, fuck Bret Hart then. This guy sucks. He's he's a dinosaur now. He's been around too long.
Yep.
But what's funny is during that, like kind of going off of that. So after WrestleMania 13, like throughout 97, you see Bret kind of like working with a lot of different guys again. One of the guys he works with is just a little known guy. He was Intercontinental Champion at the time. I don't know. You might know him. Rocky Maivia.
Yeah.
And even in that match, he helps put that guy over. And we'll get I'm gonna share some stories about that in the Bret versus Sean podcast, because I feel like that story makes more sense for that. But
Yeah.
him and Owen both help Brock during that time. And again, even while he's playing this heel backstage, he's still this guy that's trying to help out some of the younger talent, because even though he may not always agree with the Attitude Era, the guy knew where the business was going and he wanted to help it succeed.
Right. And he did it perfectly.
Yeah.
And then he gets into the the US versus America feud, and then that whole thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about HBK versus Sean, because that's really the sticking point between it all.
Vito, did you just say the USA versus America? That's a big fight.
He did. We just saw it recently.
Yeah, actually,
you might be referencing Wednesday.
Yeah.
But I think what you mean is Canada versus USA.
Yes,
that is what.
And of course, we'll get into that in the third part of this series with the Shawn Michaels stuff. But it's really crazy how he would be booed in America and cheered in Canada. Really, really crazy.
Cool. What a wonderful thing to do. Like how we won't see that again. That's cool. Like they barely go to Canada now, so you never really are going to see that. Like they were going to Canada almost every other week. I felt like there was a show somewhere, so that was really cool. But, yeah. So I guess for the people that are listening, like just to let them know, we're not ignoring the screw job. We're not ignoring the stuff with Shawn Michaels. We're sort of want to make sure that we're dedicating this solely to Bret, and then making sure we save some of that for the Bret versus Sean podcast that we're going to do for you guys.
Yeah. So this point, they get into this whole feud with Shawn Michaels and everything, and Bret and D-Generation X and everything. And there was controversy. The Montreal screw job happens. Bret gets an offer from WCW, and Vince basically says, I can't match that. You should go back and see if they can offer it to you. He does. And he decides he's going to leave. And it creates what was already kind of this powder keg between Shawn Michaels and HBK. It just ignites it. And there were some decisions made, which we'll talk about later, that then moves Bret on to WCW and leaves WWF in a bad light.
And what happened once he got to WCW, Vito? It was terrible. They hold off on introducing him after the screw job, which was one of the biggest mistakes they could have made, because this guy was super hot. He had so much momentum going into it, and they could have run with that, because it was one of the biggest stories, not just in wrestling, but it kind of made its way into some mainstream media too, with how everything played out. So it's surprising, well, not really surprising when we look back at WCW, but that they would hold back on introducing him at the time. And really, I didn't watch much of his WCW run. I saw bits and pieces, but it just seemed very convoluted in terms of their stories for him, and never really giving him much more than the US title. I know he had a world championship run, but it was kind of tainted by that time. You saw a guy that was pretty dejected.
Yeah, I would say that, are there any highlights from the WCW time? I will say this. Okay, I was listening to a Jim Cornette thing the other day, and somebody asked him, what do you think of, Sting versus Bret the Hitman Hart? And Jim Cornette goes, yeah, okay, it never happened. Because Jim Cornette, a wrestling guy, forgot that they had fought each other. It was Scorpion Deathlock versus the Sharpshooter. Think about that. Think about all of the things that could have happened in WCW that just didn't materialize. And there were just so many sharks in the water there. Everybody was there to collect a paycheck. They didn't really care, Bret cared about the business, but at that time he felt backstabbed. So what's he going to do for the business, Mm-hmm. What's the biggest highlight WCW wise for Bret Hart for each of you guys?
Probably his tribute match to Owen that he had with Benoit.
I think that's what I was going to say.
The best match he had. It's the only thing that
really
felt like it was real. It felt good. Real. It was great to watch, and it was the only thing he had to ever sink his teeth into. Unfortunately, that's the worst thing you could have, your brother dying, and yet it's the only thing that WCW ever did right was allow him to have that kind of match with Benoit, who had connections to him and the Hart family in the dungeon.
Yeah. So Vito, that's yours too.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Chris Benoit.
Yeah, no, that
Yeah,
definitely
what a match.
is. Yeah, that's definitely my mine. The other thing is when Goldberg speared him and he had the steel plate in his shirt, I thought that was pretty interesting. Again,
That was
it's a cheesy storyline with WCW, but they just had nothing. Like they were so confusing. There was no leadership there. You know, he was also out with the whole Owen thing, which I'm sure affected him. He had injuries, and it was at this point too. Like he's in there and he's in NWO, then he's not in NWO, then nothing. Nothing. So yeah, I mean it was tough. It was tough. It was tough to watch, but that was pretty much his WCW run in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we're kind of low on time here, do we want to touch on the return to WWE, which was mostly outside the ring, or do we want to save that for the third episode?
Let's save that for the third episode, because I feel like
we'll save that. We'll save that.
That'll serve us better.
Okay, so we're ending the Bret Hart saga here at the WCW days, and we're picking it up in our third part series for our fans who are listening. Join us on at @from_gorilla on Twitter. We have not been banned, unfortunately.
Not yet.
So as we're signing off here, who you guys have some 2 cents to get to?
Really, just to throw some things out there once again. If folks are listening and they want to find out more about the Bret Hart information that we've been kind of spewing out to you and singing his praises, the 2005 DVD, Best There Is, Best There Was, Best There Ever Will Be. Check that out. I'm not sure if it's on the network. It might not be actually, but you could find that on DVD. Also, the Wrestling with Shadows documentary is really good. It's very interesting because it kind of follows Bret from all the way from 96 through 98. So obviously a very pivotal time in pro wrestling, and covers the screw job and all of that, and really gives a backstage look on where his mindset was at the time. And I don't want to eat into other people's 2 cents, but a couple of just match recommendations for people to check out. These are on the network. We've talked before during the Undertaker podcast, and I said that his match with Bret Hart at One Night Only in 97. Check that out. I'm going to say that again. In Your House in December 95, he fights the British Bulldog. I actually like this better than the SummerSlam match, back to something that Vito had mentioned before. Check that out. Check out his whole gauntlet of matches from the 93 King of the Ring. We talk about Bam Bam Bigelow a lot because that's the one that's on the DVDs, but he has 2 other matches on that card, against Razor Ramon and against Mr. Perfect. And they're both pretty wonderful and different matches. And all 3 of those matches, he wins in very different ways, and none of them are the sharpshooter. And I already mentioned the match with Demolition, and I think that's all I got. Sorry to take up so much time.
Yeah, I just to go on that light too, mine would be, I really enjoyed this. Obviously, Bret Hart's one of our favorite wrestlers. We talk about him all the time. We could probably spend 100 episodes on Bret Hart, but we got the 3-part series. This is part 1. Next podcast, part 2 will be HBK. I'm excited about that one. But one thing where I got a lot of insight on is the Grilling with JR podcast, which I loved. They have a segment on HBK and a segment on Bret Hart, which I didn't even know they had before we did this, but it's very interesting. You hear a lot of the backstory from JR, and it's very cool about the 2. So I highly recommend checking that out too if you want some more insight.
Bobby Strong?
Gentlemen, it wouldn't be a Strutting from Gorilla podcast without the stock watch. We're currently at $48.24. Since Christmas, it has done nothing but go up, and I'm not really sure why. But that's one nugget. The only other nugget that I could recommend, my network nugget, if you will, would just be going back to the very first King of the Ring. It's one of my favorites of all time. And to Cassio's point earlier, he doesn't use the sharpshooter once, and it's fantastic all the way through. And I think that was a great way to show the world that he is the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, because the king of the ring, and that's where he is in my heart, the king of the ring.
We got one last thing about King of the Ring. Seriously?
Yeah. So I know that we've talked about Bret being a 2-time King of the Ring champ, and many people are like, well, when was the other fucking King of the Ring that he won? Well, here's the thing. You're not going to be able to find it on the network because technically it wasn't necessarily a pay-per-view. It was a show that they did in 91 that was I think it was in Providence, of all places, where all great shows take place. And it was technically kind of like this house show, really, where they just did this tournament. And you can find it on YouTube, actually. So I think we might try to see if we can post it on our Twitter. Might just post the link up there. But you can have there's no commentary or anything, and it's just from like a handheld camera. So the quality is what it is. But if it's something you want to check it out. So that's why when we say 2-time King of the Ring, because he won that one, but it was never televised. WWE has never released the footage.
I've looked through the old school nuggets as well, because that's where I really enjoy a lot of the classics, and couldn't find it. I made sure to scrub that twice over after we came across it.
Yeah. And as you can tell, Strutting from Gorilla loves some Bret the Hitman Hart. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see everybody next week on the Shawn Michaels episode. And then, 2 weeks from now, sorry. We're every other week here on Strutting from Gorilla. And then our third and final part of the series will be HBK versus Bret Hart. And then I've just decided that at the end of that, we're going to have a nice long trivia session, HBK trivia and Bret the Hitman Hart trivia. So I'll see you in 4 weeks for that. Okay. So we'll see you guys. Have a good week.
We now return your perception of reality to you. Until next time.